We are recording. So today we're going to be talking about factoring. We're starting right at the beginning with just remembering what a factor is and how we can pull it out of a basic expression. So when we're talking about factors, we're talking about numbers or expressions. So we can pull out a single number. We can also pull variables out if they're the same. And they divide another number or expression evenly. So we're talking about those numbers that can divide into another number. So for example, if I have the number 6, I can divide 6 by 1, right? 6 divided by 1 would give me 6. So both 6 and 1 are factors of 6. I can also divide 6 by 2. If I go 6 divided by 2, I get the number 3. If I go 6 divided by 4, I'm going to get a decimal. That means that 4 is not a factor of 6 because it doesn't give me a whole number. It doesn't divide evenly. For a number like 5, it can divide by 1, but no other numbers. So these are how we find the factors, right? What numbers are divisible? And oftentimes what we do is we test. So we go the number divided by 1, the number divided by 2, and as you get better at this, you'll just know. A lot of these numbers, you just know the factors. So we're going to look at 2 and 6x plus 2. So we were looking for a number that divides into both 6x and 2. So if I look at the factors for 6, I actually just listed them, 1, 2, 3, and 6. And for 2, I have 1 and 2. So if I look there, my common factors are 1 and 2. What I'm looking for, the one I want to pull out, is the greatest common factor. So we're looking at what is the biggest factor, because remember, all of these numbers that we found are called factors. We're looking for the biggest factor that goes into all the terms. So it has to work for both of them. We can also look for variables. So are there any variables that appear in all of the terms? Now in this case we only have one variable. So it's actually, we can't pull anything out here because it's not in all the terms. These have to be in each and every term. So here the biggest one is the 2. So we're going to take that 2 and we're going to factor it out. And we factor it out. It's kind of like the opposite of multiplying. We're going to divide. So we take that and we factor it out by dividing each term by the factor. And that factor is going to end up outside the bracket. So we're saying we're pulling this 2 outside the bracket by dividing it. What are we left with? 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that's the factored expression. So it's like backwards to what we were doing yesterday or the other day. So here we've got 12. And so if I go 12 divided by 1 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is going to give me 6. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. 12 doesn't divide by 5. And 6 is already on my list, so that means I've found all my factors. 24, bigger number, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 24 divided by 3 is 8, 4 and 6, and it doesn't divide by 12. So these guys actually has a lot of common factors. What we're looking for is the biggest common factor, the biggest number that divides into both of them. And so that number, each term is going to get divided by, and it's going to get pulled outside. Now, the second part of this that we didn't have to deal with in the first one is this time we have an x in both terms, right? An x in both. So when we have variables that appear in all the terms, we want to know what is the smallest exponent of each of these letters. because the smallest exponent means that that's one that all of the terms have. Because remember that if we have an x times x, right, x squared, and we have an x, they're going to have one x in common. So just like with the factors, if we expand our variables, we're going to end up with the ones that are in common. So the smallest variable tells us how many are going to be in common. So this one just has an x in common. So we're also dividing by that x. So we divide by the number and the variable that's in common. 12 divided by 12 is 1. Now remember, we don't have to write that 1 if you don't want to. X squared divided by x, we're going to subtract the exponents, 2 minus 1. 24 divided by 12, or negative 24 divided by 12 is 2. X divided by x is going to cancel. So that's the factored version. So we're going to try a few more of those. So remember from before, sorry about that. So we are factoring 6x squared minus 15x cubed. So remember, first, we want to find that greatest common factor. So we're looking at for the coefficient. So 6 and for 15. So 6 we've done a couple times now, right? So the more you do these, the more familiar you're going to come with the common factors. So you don't need to write these common factors out if you start to remember them. So 15 divided by 1, 15 doesn't divide by 2, but it does divide by 3 and doesn't divide by 4. When we get to 5, we're starting to repeat our numbers, so we found all our factors. So if I'm looking here, we've got 2 common factors, but the biggest of those factors is going to be the 3, so we're going to divide by 3. Second, we're looking at the variables, right? Do we have a variable that repeats? So we're looking for, so find the greatest common factor of the coefficients. And then we're going to find the greatest number of variables that can get taken out. So an x squared is an x times an x. X cubed is an x times an x times an x. So we can actually take out 2 of those. So remember from before, we're looking for the smallest exponent is 2, right? So we can take out 2. So we have 3x squared, goes on the outside of the bracket because we're pulling it out. What we're going to be left with is 6 divided by 3 is 2. X squareds cancel. Negative 15 divided by 3, negative 5. And then x cubed divided by x squared, we're going to be left with an x. So we're going to combine those to pull the greatest common factor outside the brackets. And then last thing we did was set up the brackets and fill it with the quotient, because we divided to find that, right? So quotient means what was left over. So B. First thing we're going to do, 24 and 16. 24, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, and 24. So you're going to start to get used to these, right? You know what those factors are. 1, 2, 4, 4, 8, 6, 8. So it looks like my greatest common factor here is 8. Now this time I have 2 variables. So I have x cubed in the first term, which is going to be x times x times x. And I have x squared in the second term. So I can take 2 x's out. I also have y's that I could take out. So I have a y cubed and a y to the 5th. Remember, this is a step where if you could do it in your head, you don't need to write this step down. So it looks here like I could take 3. And remember we said the smallest number. So notice that 3 is my smallest exponent there for y. So we've got 8x squared y cubed is my greatest common factor. 24 divided by 8 is going to give me 3x, and my y's are going to cancel. Plus 2 My x's are going to cancel. Y to the third. So 3 more examples. So even if we have more terms, the steps here are the same. We just need to make sure that wherever we're pulling out is the same for all of the terms that I'm looking at. So here, instead of only having 2, I'm going to be comparing 3 different numbers. So 10. Remember what I'm doing here is I'm testing those numbers. Now for some of these, I just know them now, so I don't need to test them every time. So if I look at these, my 1s are in common and my 2s are in common. So 2 is going to be my greatest common factor for the coefficients. Step 2, I'm looking at my variables. What's common between all 3 terms? So I see that I have an A in every term. And I only have one of them, right? So A is going to be common. Notice that I have an x in one term but not in the other 2. That means it's not a common factor. Same with my y and my z. Even though it's in 2, it has to be in all 3 for it to be common. So y and z are going to not be common factors, just a. So 2a is my common factor. What am I going to be left with? 10 divided by 2 is 5. My a's cancel. 8 divided by 2 is 4. My a's are going to cancel. I'm left with that yz. 2 a's are going to cancel. Left with that z. 4x minus 1 is a tricky one, because if I look at 4, I've got 1, 2, and 4, and 1 only has one factor, it's 1. So here, the only factor they have in common is a 1. When you see that, it means these coefficients have no common factors, right? So we can't factor it if there's no common factors. I also don't have the same variables. So the variables also have no common factors here. That means this is already in simplest form, so it cannot be factored any further. So I've got 12, I've got 23, and I've got 17. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 12. 1 and 23, 1 and 17. You can test these as you go, right? 23 divided by 1, 23 divided by 2, 23 divided by 4. Once you hit kind of halfway, if you haven't found a common factor yet, it's probably a prime number, meaning it only has 2 factors. So notice here, my only common factor is 1. That means that I cannot simplify the coefficients for this. But I still need to check the variables, because this time, I have an x in each of them. So I have an x squared in my first one. I have an x in the second term, and I have an x in the third term. So it looks like I can pull one x out. So my greatest common factor here is just an x. So what am I left with? Well, 12x squared divided by x. The 12 carries down. I'll have an x left. My x's are going to cancel here. So I'm just left with a y. My x's are going to cancel here, so I'm just left with that 17. And then I put a cat there just for you guys. So I put a greatest common factors assignment on there. Give it a try. If you're unsure about anything, please send me a message and I'll try and help you out. Enjoy your first blended learning day group, Monday group.